My mom sent me a pizza photo while I was fighting for my life in the ICU. The first thing I heard when I opened my eyes was a machine beeping next to my head, and the first thing I saw was my phone lighting up with a photo of a pizza. My name is Meredith Wren. I'm 34 years old, and 3 days before that moment, I had been driving home in the rain with a folder of legal papers on my passenger seat, papers that were about to blow my family apart, though I didn't know it yet. If you're new here, welcome. Hit subscribe before you go, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this all started because you need to understand my family before you'll understand what happened in that hospital bed. I grew up in a small town called Asheville, Ohio. We had one gas station, one Methodist church, and a hardware store on Main Street that my dad, Roy Wren, ran for almost 30 years. My mom, Denise, stayed home and kept the house running like a business. She had rules for everything. Sunday dinner started at 5, not 5:01. She also had a favorite, and it wasn't me. That was my little brother, Colton. Colton was 2 years younger than me, and he could do no wrong. If he forgot his homework, my mom called it forgetfulness. If I forgot mine, she called it laziness. If Colton broke a window playing baseball, she laughed about it at church the next Sunday like it was a cute story. When I got a B on a test once, she asked me what happened. I don't tell you this to complain. I tell you this because it explains everything that came later. In my house, love wasn't given equally. It was given based on how much you needed it. Colton needed constant praise to feel okay about himself. I didn't need much, so I didn't get much. I learned early that if I wanted anything done right, I had to do it myself and not ask for help. By the time I was 22, I had a degree in accounting and a steady job as a claims auditor at an insurance company 2 hours away from Asheville. That's where I met my husband, Adrian. He's a structural inspector, quiet, careful, the kind of man who reads instructions before he builds anything. We met at a work training in Columbus, and within a year we were married in a small backyard ceremony with maybe 30 people there. My mom came to the wedding. She smiled in every photo. But for the first year of our marriage, she never once said Adrian's name. She called him your husband like his name was something she'd rather not remember. It took her almost 2 years to finally call him Adrian instead of him. I used to tell myself she just needed time. Small towns are slow like that, I thought. People warm up eventually. When I was 26, my dad had a heart attack behind the counter of the hardware store. He didn't make it to the hospital in time. That day changed the shape of my whole family, though it took years for me to understand exactly how. After the funeral, my mom asked me and Colton to sit down at the kitchen table. She had a folder in front of her, the store's paperwork, the lease, some old insurance documents. She said the store needed someone to manage things while everyone figured out what to do long term. Colton had just lost his job at the time, so it made sense for him to step in and run daily operations. I didn't argue. I lived 2 hours away. I had my own job. Seemed reasonable. What didn't seem reasonable looking back now was the piece of paper my mom slid across the table a few months later. She called it just a formality, something to make sure the store's finances stayed organized while things settled. It named her as trustee over whatever was left of my dad's ownership stake. I remember reading it quickly at that kitchen table, tired, grieving, wanting to trust my own mother. I signed it. I didn't hire a lawyer to look at it first. I didn't even make a copy for myself. I just signed it and drove back home. That signature would come back into my life in a way I never expected. For the next year and a half, I didn't think much about the store. Colton ran it. My mom oversaw things. I called sometimes to ask how the numbers looked, and I always got vague answers. It's fine, don't worry about it. Your brother's handling it. You have your own job, Meredith, let him have this. But something started nagging at me. I'm an auditor. Numbers are my whole job. And little things didn't add up. Colton bought a truck the same year the store supposedly had a slow season. My mom mentioned once, almost bragging, that Colton had started drawing a manager's salary, but no one had ever asked me, the other person whose name was technically tied to that trust, whether that was okay. So about 4 months before the accident that put me in that hospital bed, I did something I had never done before in my entire life. I hired my own lawyer. Her name was Patricia Ames, and she worked out of a small office above a dentist's practice in Columbus. I brought her copies of the old trust document, bank statements I'd quietly requested, and everything I could remember about the last 2 years. She read through it slowly, tapping her pen on the desk, and then she looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. "Meredith, this document your mother had you sign gives her almost unlimited control, and from what you're showing me, some of this money hasn't been managed the way it should have been." I sat in that office feeling something crack open inside me. Not anger yet. Just a cold, clear feeling like waking up from a fog I didn't know I'd been standing in for 2 years. Over the following months, Patricia and I built a case quietly. We requested records. We found unpaid rent on the store building that had been covered by pulling from the trust instead of the business account. We found personal expenses charged to accounts that should have been separate. Every discovery felt like another small stone dropped into a bucket, and the bucket kept getting heavier. I didn't tell my mother any of this. I didn't tell Colton. I didn't even tell most of my friends. Adrian knew because Adrian always knows, and he never once told me to stop or to let it go. He just asked me what I needed and then helped me get it. On a Thursday evening, for months after I first walked into Patricia's office, she called me and told me the paperwork was finally ready. New documents that would dissolve my mother's trusteeship and formally return my share of my father's remaining ownership stake to me, the way it should have been handled from the very beginning. She told me I could come by her office that evening to review everything and sign. I remember driving there in the rain. I remember sitting across from Patricia at her desk, reading each page slowly, my hands a little unsteady, not from doubt but from knowing that once I signed, there was no quiet way to undo it. My mother would find out eventually. Colton would find out eventually. And nothing between us would ever go back to how it used to be. I signed anyway. Patricia told me she would file everything first thing the next morning. I remember thanking her, folding my copy of the papers into a manila envelope, and walking out into the parking lot where the rain had turned into a steady, heavy downpour. I remember thinking as I got into my car that I finally felt like I had done something for myself, something my mother hadn't approved, hadn't controlled, hadn't shaped into whatever story she wanted to tell about our family. I don't remember much after that. What I know now, pieced together later from a police report and from Adrian, is that a delivery truck ran a red light about 15 minutes from my house. My car spun into a guardrail. Paramedics had to cut part of the door away to get me out. I was rushed into surgery for internal bleeding, and I stayed on a ventilator for almost 2 full days while doctors worked to stop the damage to my spleen and stabilize the swelling in my brain. I was in a coma for 40 hours. My mother, I would later learn, was called by Adrian the same night. She drove down. She sat in the ICU waiting room for exactly 11 minutes before a nurse told her I was stable enough that she could step in briefly, since I was still unconscious. She stood by my bed. She didn't touch my hand. She left after less than 10 minutes inside the room itself. That same evening, while I lay in that hospital bed with tubes down my throat, my mother drove 40 minutes across 2 counties to my brother Colton's house, where there was a table set up with balloons, a banner that said, "Congratulations, Colton," and a large pepperoni pizza sitting in the middle of it all. I didn't know any of this yet. Not the party. Not the timing. Not what Colton was even being congratulated for. All I knew when I finally opened my eyes 3 days later, groggy, confused, my whole left side wrapped in bandages, was that my phone was buzzing on the little table beside my hospital bed. And when I picked it up with a shaking hand, the very first thing I saw was a photo of that pizza. My mother's thumb at the edge of the frame, and a caption that would stay burned into my mind for the rest of my life. "Wish you could see this, we're so proud of him." I read that message 4 times before it fully landed. My eyes were still adjusting to the hospital lights, my throat raw from the tube they just pulled out that morning, and my brain was trying to process 2 things at once. 1, I was alive. 2, my mother had sent me a photo of a party celebrating my brother, while I was still lying in intensive care. A nurse came in to check my vitals and found me staring at my phone with tears running sideways down my face into my ear. She asked if I was in pain. I told her it wasn't that kind of pain. Adrian walked in a few minutes later carrying 2 coffees, and when he saw my face he set them down fast and grabbed my hand. I turned my phone toward him and showed him the message. I watched his jaw tighten. He's not a man who gets loud when he's angry. He gets quiet. Very quiet. He sat down in the chair beside my bed and just said, "When did she send that?" I checked the timestamp. My stomach dropped. The message had been sent the same evening I was in surgery, the same night the doctors weren't sure if I'd wake up at all. Over the next couple of days, while I was still too weak to do much besides sleep and sip water through a straw, Adrian filled in the pieces I didn't have. My mother had come to the hospital once briefly the first night. She hadn't come back since. Not the next day. Not the day after that. Adrian said she'd called him twice, both times asking about my condition in a tone he described as checking a box, and both times ending the call by mentioning something about Colton. I didn't understand what Colton had to do with any of this yet. I assumed the party was just something small, a birthday maybe, something ordinary that my mother had thoughtlessly scheduled the same week I got hurt. I told myself that. I wanted to believe that. Then my cousin Renata texted me. Renata and I had never been especially close growing up, but she was the kind of person who noticed things other people in the family pretended not to see. She'd always been a little on the outside of my mother's inner circle, mostly because she asked too many honest questions at family dinners. Her text came through on my third day awake, a simple message that said, "I need to show you something, are you okay to look at your phone?" I said yes. She sent me screenshots. A group text thread with my aunts, my mother, a few family friends. The thread had been active the same day I was in surgery. My mother had written, "Meredith stable, nothing to worry about, doctors are optimistic." That message went out 3 hours before the surgeon had actually told Adrian my condition was, in his exact words, "Still serious, we won't know more until she wakes up." I stared at that screenshot for a long time. My mother hadn't just skipped visiting me. She had actively told people I was fine, smoothing things over so nobody would ask questions, so nobody would show up, so nothing would interrupt whatever was happening at Colton's house that evening. I asked Renata what the party had actually been for. She hesitated before answering, which told me it was something I wasn't going to like. "Colton got the store," she wrote. "Like officially. Your mom signed something over to him. Everyone was there celebrating. I thought you knew." I remember setting the phone down on the blanket and just breathing for a minute. Not crying. Not yet. Just breathing, trying to let that sentence settle somewhere in my body without breaking something on the way down. I hadn't known. Nobody had told me. My own mother had transferred ownership of my father's store to my brother, thrown him a party for it, and done all of it while I was unconscious in an ICU bed 2 counties away, then told the rest of the family I was fine so nothing would slow the celebration down. I want to tell you I got angry right away. I didn't. What I felt first was smaller than anger. It was a kind of quiet, sinking loneliness, the kind where you realize the people who are supposed to love you the most have built an entire evening around forgetting you exist. The anger came later that night, once Adrian had gone to grab dinner and I was alone with my phone and my thoughts. I opened my email out of habit, something to distract myself, and that's when I saw it. An email from Patricia, my lawyer, sent the morning after my accident, the same morning my mother was telling everyone I was fine. The subject line read, "Filing confirmation. Trust reassignment complete." My hands went cold. I opened the email slowly, half expecting it to say something had gone wrong, that the filing had been delayed because of what happened to me. Instead, Patricia had written a short, professional note letting me know that the paperwork I signed 2 nights before the accident had been processed exactly as planned. As of that morning, while I was in surgery fighting to survive, my mother's trusteeship over my father's remaining ownership in the hardware store had been legally dissolved. The ownership stake had been formally reassigned to me, as the surviving heir named in my father's original estate documents, based on a clause my mother had apparently never bothered to read carefully when she'd had me sign that first formality 2 years earlier. I read it 3 times the same way I'd read that pizza message 3 times, except this time the feeling in my chest was completely different. My mother didn't know. That was the part that hit me hardest. Lying there in that hospital bed with my heart rate monitor ticking steadily beside me. She had thrown a party celebrating Colton's ownership of a store that legally, as of that very morning, was no longer his to celebrate. She had stood in front of family and friends, handed my brother a version of pride she had never once handed me, and she had done it without knowing that the ground underneath that celebration had already shifted while she wasn't looking. I didn't say anything to Adrian that night. I needed to sit with it first. I needed to understand what it meant, not just legally but for my family, for the version of us that existed before that pizza photo showed up on my screen. 2 days later, on what the nurses called day 12 since my admission, my mother finally called me directly for the first time since the accident. Her voice was bright when I picked up, almost cheerful. the kind of tone she used at church potlucks when she wanted everyone to think everything was under control. She asked how I was feeling, said she was so relieved I was doing better, and then without missing a beat she said, "You should see how well Colton's doing running things at the store. I really think your dad would be proud." I sat there in my hospital bed, the phone pressed to my ear, my mother's voice still bright and unaware on the other end, and I knew something she didn't know yet. I knew that Patricia's letter, the one making everything official, was already sealed in an envelope on its way to my mother's mailbox in Ashwell. I told her I was glad she called. I told her I was tired and needed to rest. I hung up before she could say anything else. Then I looked over at Adrian, who had been sitting quietly in the corner the whole time, and I said the only thing I could think to say. She has no idea what's coming. The letter landed on a Tuesday, and by Wednesday morning my phone had 14 missed calls from my mother. I want you to picture this. I am home from the hospital exactly 9 days. I still have a bandage on my side. I still can't lift my left arm past my shoulder. And my mother is calling me over and over like the building is on fire. I finally picked up on call 15. "What is this?" she said. "No hello. No, how are you feeling?" "Just that." "That's my lawyer's letter," I said. "I told you there would be one. You told me nothing. You had a stranger mail me legal threats while you were supposed to be recovering." I sat down on my couch slow because sitting down fast still hurt. "I signed those papers the night before my accident, Mom. Before I even knew I'd be in a hospital. This isn't revenge. This is just what was already true." She said I was punishing her for one photo. She said I was using a near-death experience to steal her son's business. I remember looking at the ceiling and thinking, she still doesn't understand what happened. She thinks this is about a pizza. It was never about a pizza. The pizza was just the moment I finally saw clearly. "I'm not taking anything from Colton that was ever really his," I told her. "Dad left that store to be handled fairly. It wasn't handled fairly." She hung up on me. I sat there holding the phone, and for the first time since I woke up in that hospital bed I didn't cry. I just felt still. 3 days later, Colton showed up at my parents' house while I was there dropping off soup for my mother, who still wasn't speaking to me but would still eat food I made her. That tells you a lot about my family, honestly. He walked in holding a folder. Actual paper like it was a courtroom. "I built that store back up," he said, dropping the folder on the kitchen table. "You want to see the numbers? Sales are up 11% since I took over." I opened the folder. I didn't even need my glasses to see what was wrong with it. "Colton, this shows revenue. It doesn't show what you paid yourself. It doesn't show the $4,000 you took out in March for a truck payment. It doesn't show that you haven't paid store rent to the estate in 14 months. His face changed. Just a little. Like a door closing halfway. "Mom approved that," he said. "Mom isn't the trustee anymore. She wasn't supposed to approve anything without me for the last 2 years, and she did it anyway, and you let her." This is the part one have to explain carefully because it surprised even me. I had been keeping a folder of my own for almost 2 years before the accident. Not out of anger at first. Out of habit. I'm an auditor. I notice numbers that don't add up the way other people notice a bad smell. Every time Colton withdrew cash from the store account for something personal. Every time my mother approved a purchase without telling me. Every time I got left off a family group text about store decisions. I wrote the date down. I didn't know why I was doing it. I just knew I might need it someday. Someday came faster than I expected. I told Colton everything calmly, sitting at that same kitchen table where I'd eaten 1,000 dinners growing up, where I used to do my math homework while my mother praised whatever Colton had done that day, even if it was just showing up. Here's the part nobody in my family knew until that week. When my father died, he didn't only leave a will. He left something else. A private letter with his own lawyer, separate from the estate documents, that my mother had never seen because she never asked to see it. My lawyer requested the full probate file while sorting through the trust dispute, and that's when it surfaced. I remember reading it in my kitchen with Adrian standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder. My father had written that he worried Colton would run the store into the ground if he ever took full control too soon. He wrote that I had always been the one who understood the business, even though I never got the credit for it. And then one line that broke something open in my chest. If anyone in this family ever needs to make the hard call, it should be her. She's the one who actually sees things clearly. My father saw me. My whole life I thought no one in that house really saw me, and it turned out the one person I thought was too quiet to notice anything had noticed everything. I didn't show that letter to my mother right away. I wanted to. I wanted to throw it on the table and say, see, he knew. But something told me to wait. Some things you don't spend on anger. You save them. My mother, meanwhile, was busy trying to fix her image instead of fixing what she'd broken. She planned a big family dinner, the kind with the good tablecloth, and told everyone it was to bring the family back together. I found out later it was really so she could confront me in front of aunts and uncles, thinking I wouldn't argue with her in a room full of people. She was wrong about that too. We sat down, 12 of us, at my Aunt Carla's long dining table. My mother waited until the plates were cleared to start. I think it's time Julia explained to this family why she's trying to punish her own brother, she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Every fork stopped moving. I looked at her. I wasn't shaking. I want people to understand that. I wasn't shaking at all. You want me to explain, I said. Okay, let's talk about timing. I was in surgery for 6 hours on a Thursday. You visited for 11 minutes that night. Then you drove to Colton's party and posted a photo of pizza and balloons at 8:42 p.m. The hospital's own records show I was still in recovery, still on a ventilator at 8:42 p.m. The room went completely silent. My Aunt Carla actually put her napkin down. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I signed papers the night before my accident because I found out on my own that money was disappearing from a store my father built with his hands. That's not revenge. That's math. My mother's face went red, then pale. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. You have always looked for reasons to make this family look bad, she said, and her voice cracked in the middle of it. No, I said. I stopped hiding the reasons. That's different. She left. Just walked out, grabbed her purse and drove off, leaving her own dinner party. Colton mumbled something about talking to his own lawyer, which we all knew he couldn't afford, and left a few minutes later. I sat there at that table in a room full of relatives who didn't know what to say, and for the first time in this entire story, I finished my glass of water in peace. 6 months later, I stood in the hardware store on Route 9 holding a set of keys that finally legally completely belonged to me. Getting here wasn't quick and it wasn't clean. My lawyer and Colton's lawyer, once he actually hired one using money he borrowed from an uncle, spent almost 4 months in mediation instead of a courtroom. I want to be honest with you, I didn't want to destroy my brother. I wanted the truth on paper. Those are different goals, and mediation let me get the second one without chasing the first. Here's how it ended up. Colton kept a small ownership stake in the store, but tied to real performance now, not to being my mother's favorite. If the store makes money under honest management, he benefits. If he mismanages it again, that stake shrinks. I became majority owner. Exactly the way my father's private letter said should happen if the family ever fought over it. I didn't want to run the store myself. That's not who I am. Instead, I kept on Marcus, the manager who'd worked there 14 years and never once touched a dollar that wasn't his. I raised his pay. I gave him real authority. The store started making steady money again within 2 months. Money that helped Adrian and me finally pay off what was left of my hospital bills. The ones that used to sit in a drawer making my stomach hurt every time I saw the envelope. My relationship with my mother didn't end with some big movie moment. I want to tell you that because I think a lot of these stories promise a hug and a happy ending, and real life is slower and messier than that. For almost 2 months she didn't call at all. Then one Sunday out of nowhere she called and just talked about the weather for 10 minutes. I let her. Sometimes that's what an apology looks like in my family. Not words. Just someone showing up again in a small, careful way. About 4 months after that dinner at Aunt Carla's, she said something I never expected. We were on the phone and there was a long pause and then she said quiet, almost like she didn't want to say it out loud. I sent that pizza picture because I didn't know what else to do. You were unconscious. I didn't know how to sit still in that room. I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying I panicked, and it came out as the wrong thing. I sat with that for a second. I didn't forgive her completely in that moment. But I believed her, and that mattered more than I expected it to. It didn't erase 30 years of being the quiet daughter nobody worried about. But it explained one photo, and I let myself accept that explanation for what it was. The person who really held me together through all of this wasn't my mother. It was my grandmother, Nana Elsie, my father's mother, 81 years old, who drove herself to that hospital every single day I was there. Even the 2 days I don't remember at all. Adrian told me later she'd sit in the corner of my room with her knitting bag and just be present, like her being there was its own kind of medicine. A few weeks after the mediation ended, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was a card, old, the paper gone soft at the corners. It was from my high school graduation 16 years earlier. My father had written it and given it to her to keep, because he said he wanted me to have it someday when she needs it more than she needs it now. Nana Elsie said she never knew exactly when that day would come, but she knew it when she saw it. The card said, in my father's plain handwriting, "The quiet ones build the things that last. Don't ever let anyone convince you loud is the same as important." I cried reading that in my kitchen, the good kind of crying, the kind that empties something out instead of filling it up. My cousin Renata and I got closer too. She's the one who quietly sent me screenshots while I was still in the hospital, showing me what my mother had said about me to the rest of the family behind my back. I used to think that made her a troublemaker. Now I think it made her the only honest person in the room. We get lunch every few weeks now. She's the first person I told when the mediation settlement was finalized. Colton reached out about 2 months after everything settled. Not to apologize, not really. He asked me actual questions about inventory turnover and supplier contracts, things he'd never once asked me in his life. I think, in his own slow way, that was his version of respect. I answered every question. I didn't hold it against him that he hadn't asked sooner. I still think about that pizza photo more than I probably should. I kept it, actually. I never deleted it. It sits in a folder on my phone next to a photo of the store's new sign, the one Marcus and I picked out together, still saying my father's name across the top in the same red letters it always had. My mother thought that photo would make me feel small and forgotten while I lay in a hospital bed, unable to speak for myself. Instead, it became the exact proof I needed that I had to stop waiting for my family to see me and start proving to myself what I was capable of. Standing in that store now, smelling sawdust and old with the way I did as a kid trailing behind my father while he worked, I don't feel angry anymore. I feel steady. That's a strange word to end a story like this on, but it's the true one. I didn't get the family I used to wish for. I got something else instead. I got clarity and a business my father would be proud of, and a grandmother's card that took 16 years to reach me at exactly the right moment, and a quiet kind of peace that nobody in my family can take a photo of and send behind my back. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the quiet one in a room full of people who never noticed you were paying attention the whole time, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next one.